Under the blistering sun of the western plains, the dusty streets of that small frontier town seemed to hold their breath. The wind carried the dry scent of sagebrush and the faint temps of iron from the blacksmith's forge. But it could not mask the tension that gripped the town square. A crowd had gathered, whispers and uneasy murmurs spreading like wildfire. At the center, a young woman stood rigid, her hands trembling, her eyes wide with fear. Her own father, a towering figure with a face hardened by years of harsh land and harsher choices, raised his hand, not for guidance, not for discipline, but in anger. He struck her, the crack of his hand against flesh ringing out over the quiet town. Gasps echoed from the onlookers. Mothers clutched their children closer, cowboys shifted uneasily, and even the dogs seemed to sense the wrongness of the moment. She had always been quiet, careful to keep to herself, navigating a world where the line between survival and cruelty was razor thin. Her father's authority was law in this place, and the people of the town had learned long ago not to interfere. But seeing the blow, seeing her flinch under the weight of a bond meant to protect and nurture, something stirred in the hearts of those watching. Eyes that had looked away now focused. Hearts that had been silent now beat with unease. There was fear, yes, but also a flicker of anger at the injustice of it all. The girl lowered her head, trying to hide her face, wishing she could disappear into the dust that swirled at her feet. But no amount of hiding could erase what had happened. The shame and the sting would mark this day forever. Just as her father lifted his hand again, his face twisted with frustration and pride, a shadow passed over the square. The townsfolk turned, shielding their eyes against the glaring sun, and there he was. Not a man of the town, not a man of her father's circle, but a warrior whose very presence demanded attention. The Apache man rode in on a horse as black as midnight, its hooves sending tiny clouds of dust into the air with each stride. He was a stranger, yet he carried the authority of someone who had seen more of the world than any of them. His eyes, sharp and unflinching, scanned the scene and immediately locked onto the girl. She looked up, startled by the intensity of his gaze, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition of wrongs suffered and a promise of protection. Her father's hand froze midair. There was a tension in the air that even he could not ignore. The Apache warrior dismounted smoothly, the sun glinting off the worn leather of his gear and the intricate beadwork of his clothing. He walked with the certainty of someone who moved with the rhythm of the land itself, each step deliberate, each movement measured. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing that this was not a man to be trifled with. Then, in a voice that was low but carried to every ear in the square, he spoke. "Now she's mine." The words cut through the noise of the town like a knife, sharp and unyielding. Silence fell, broken only by the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Every eye turned to her father, whose face had gone pale, the color draining as he realized that his authority, his dominance, would not go unchallenged this time. The girl's heart pounded in her chest. She had never seen anyone stand up to her father like that, let alone a stranger who seemed untouchable, fearless, and certain. Confusion swirled with a spark of hope she hadn't dared feel before. Could this man truly protect her? Could he offer a life where she was not merely a pawn in her father's unforgiving world? Her instincts told her to flee, yet her feet stayed planted, drawn by the undeniable gravity of his presence. She had never encountered someone who could command such quiet power. Someone who could alter the course of her life with a single, unwavering declaration. Her father took a step back, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing as he processed the implications of the warrior's claim. The town had long whispered about Apache warriors, their skill with bow and spear, their unmatched understanding of the land and its dangers. He had never thought one would ride into his town, into his life, and confront him so openly, challenging the control he had held without question. Yet here it was, a stranger staking a claim over a life that had been so cruelly confined. And the air was electric with the tension of confrontation. Around them, the townsfolk held their collective breath, unsure if the situation would erupt into violence or if a strange sort of justice was about to take root. Some leaned forward, their curiosity outweighing their fear, while others stepped back, whispering prayers under their breath. The wind seemed to pause, and the horses in the distance stopped grazing, as if sensing the shift in power. The girl's eyes flicked between her father and the warrior, her mind racing. Could she trust this man? Could she believe in the protection he promised with those few words? And yet, deep down, a small voice inside her whispered that this might be her only chance at freedom. The Apache warrior's eyes softened ever so slightly, but his stance remained firm, unwavering. He did not speak again, but the certainty in his posture was enough to silence the town square. Every man, woman, and child could feel that this was a moment that would be remembered long after the dust settled. Her father's shoulders tensed, the old pride and stubbornness warring with a creeping awareness that he was no longer the master of this moment. For the first time in years, someone else held the power to protect her, to dictate the terms of her future. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the square, the girl felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. She did not yet understand who this warrior truly was, nor did she know the dangers and challenges that lay ahead. But she sensed that life as she had known it was about to change forever. The town seemed smaller somehow, the heat sharper, and the air thick with unspoken possibilities. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to understand, but her voice caught in her throat. The warrior's gaze held her, steady and unrelenting, and in that moment, she realized that words were not needed to promise safety, nor to declare that her life was now intertwined with someone who would fight for her without hesitation. The tension lingered like a storm on the horizon. Would her father accept this new reality, or would he resist until the last ounce of pride left him? What did the warrior expect from her, and what dangers awaited if she chose to follow him? The crowd remained frozen, a living tableau of suspense and uncertainty. As the two figures, one representing control and cruelty, the other protection and possibility, stood locked in a silent struggle over her fate. The sound of distant hooves, the murmur of the wind through the dry grass, and the creak of wooden buildings seemed to pulse with the same nervous energy that gripped the girl's heart in that moment. She felt the weight of her life's turning point pressing down on her, a force that would sweep her into an unknown future. The Apache warrior's declaration had been simple, yet it carried the gravity of 1,000 unspoken promises. She could sense it in his posture, in the calm intensity of his eyes, and in the way the crowd instinctively moved aside, acknowledging his presence. The question now was whether she would take the step toward freedom and trust, or remain trapped in a life dictated by fear and dominance. As the sun reached its zenith, casting harsh light across the dusty town square, her mind raced with thoughts of what could come next. Every possibility seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. The clash between past suffering and a chance at protection had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The town waited with bated breath, her father's anger simmering beneath the surface, the warrior's resolve unshaken, and the girl herself standing at the edge of a decision that could shape the rest of her life. The wind shifted, sending a swirl of dust across the square, brushing against the girl's face. She felt it on her skin like a silent reminder that change was here, unstoppable and immediate. She could hear the distant calls of birds, the faint rattle of shutters, and the heartbeat of a town that was about to witness a story unlike any it had ever seen. The Apache warrior did not move, but his presence was a promise of protection, a declaration of a new reality, and a challenge to everything she had known. And so, with her father's shadow looming, the crowd's gaze fixed, and the sun beating down like a relentless judge, she took her first tentative breath toward an uncertain future. Nothing had been resolved, nothing had been explained, yet everything had shifted in a single moment. The question remained: would she find safety, freedom, and perhaps even trust in the stranger who had stepped into her life? Or would the shadows of her past and the cruelty of her father continue to shape her destiny? The answer would come, but not yet. For now, the town held its breath, and so did she. Standing on the precipice of a story that had only just begun, the girl's hands were still shaking as the Apache warrior stood before her, his gaze calm but unyielding. She could feel the heat of the sun on her skin, but it was nothing compared to the fire of fear and confusion swirling inside her. Her father's glare was sharp, but there was a hesitation in it now, a crack in the armor of control he had always worn so easily. He had ruled this family with an iron hand, every word measured, every punishment swift. And yet here was someone who did not flinch at his presence, someone who did not seem afraid of him at all. The warrior spoke again, his voice low but steady. "You have no reason to fear him anymore." He gestured toward the father, whose chest heaved with restrained anger. The girl's heart skipped. Fear had been her companion for as long as she could remember. But there was something in the warrior's words that made her wonder if she could actually imagine a life without it. The town had long whispered about men who carried their own rules, men who lived by the land and the code of the Apache. She had never thought one would enter her life so boldly, offering not just protection, but a promise she could scarcely comprehend. Her father stepped closer, the dust from the street rising around his boots. "You don't know what you're saying," he growled, his voice edged with warning. "This girl is mine. She's always been mine. You have no right." His hand twitched at his side, but the warrior's calm stance did not waver. There was a stillness in him that made the father's anger seem almost fragile, like a brittle branch that could snap with the right touch. "I know exactly what I'm saying," the warrior replied, his tone even, almost quiet, but every word carried weight. "She deserves a choice, and I'll make sure she has it." The girl's chest tightened. She had never heard words like that addressed to her before. Choices had been a luxury she had never known. Everything she had done, everything she had learned to survive, had been dictated by fear and expectation. And now, this stranger offered something entirely new. The crowd shifted uneasily. Sensing the tension that stretched between the two men, some looked to the girl, their eyes reflecting sympathy and curiosity. Others looked to the warrior, impressed by his quiet command. The father's jaw clenched, a vein thudding at his temple, but he made no move to strike. The crowd had grown, small children craning their necks, women clutching scarves to their mouths, cowboys resting hands near their gun belts. No one had ever challenged him in the town square like this. The power of fear he had always relied on seemed suddenly uncertain. The girl finally found her voice, trembling but determined. I don't want to stay like this," she said, her words barely audible above the whispering crowd. Her father's eyes flared, but she ignored it. "I want to choose my own life." The words were small, fragile, yet they hung in the air like a banner of defiance. The warrior's gaze softened, just a fraction, and he nodded slightly, acknowledging the courage it had taken to speak. Her father took a step back, his boots scraping the wooden planks of the boardwalk. He looked at the girl, searching her face as if trying to read her soul. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low but dangerous. "Nobody leaves the way they think they can." The warrior's eyes did not waver. He knew the man before him, understood the pride, the anger, the need to control. Yet he had faced men like this before, men whose lives had been shaped by fear and land and legacy, and he knew how to stand firm. "You forget." The warrior said slowly, "I'm not just anyone. I don't bend, I don't back down, and I protect those who need it." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of experience, of battles fought not just with weapons, but with instinct and courage. The girl felt a surge of relief, a glimmer of hope she had never allowed herself to imagine. Someone was finally on her side. The father turned, his boots grinding against the dust, and called out sharply, "Get inside." Now, he barked at the girl as though she were a wild animal to be controlled. But she did not move. The warrior's hand brushed hers lightly, almost reassuring, and in that small gesture, she felt the promise of safety. She knew she could not stay, not under the shadow of her father's anger, not when her life had already been dictated by fear for too long. The town square seemed frozen, the sun glaring down like a silent judge. Dust swirled, catching the light in golden spirals, and the air smelled of leather, sweat, and anticipation. The girl's eyes flicked to the warrior's face. Will you help me?" she asked, her voice trembling. The question was simple, but the weight behind it carried years of suppressed longing for freedom, for safety. For someone who would see her as more than property or possession? He nodded, and the hint of a smile passed over his face. A rare softness in a world of harsh realities. "Yes," he said, "but you have to trust me. There will be dangers. You'll see things you never imagined. And you'll need courage you didn't know you had." She swallowed hard, nodding slowly. She did not fully understand the risks, but she understood the chance being offered. And for the first time in her life, it felt like hope was within reach. Her father's face darkened. He stepped closer, voice low and threatening. "I won't let you take her. This town, this family, she's mine." The warrior's eyes remained calm, focused, and unwavering. He stepped forward, closing the space between them with a steady, deliberate pace, his presence commanding more attention than his words ever could. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing that a confrontation was imminent, but unsure if it would erupt into violence or some strange resolution. "I'm not asking," the warrior said evenly. "I'm telling. She has the right to decide for herself." Every word struck with the precision of an arrow, clear and undeniable. The father's fists clenched at his sides, but he did not strike. Something in the air, in the intensity of the warrior, in the way the girl now looked at him, gave pause. The father had ruled through fear for years, but he had never faced someone who moved with such authority and certainty. Someone who would not yield or flinch. The girl stepped forward, almost instinctively, standing taller despite the fear that still gnawed at her stomach. I choose to go with him," she said, her voice gaining strength. Her father's eyes blazed, but the warrior placed a protective hand lightly on her shoulder, an unspoken shield. It was the first time she felt the weight of protection rather than oppression. The crowd murmured, some in awe, some in shock. Life in this small town had rarely changed, rarely been challenged, and yet here it was. A new story being written in the dusty square under the merciless sun. Horses shifted, boots scraped against wood, and the faint rustle of prairie grass sounded like whispers of fate. The girl's world was about to expand far beyond the boundaries of her father's control, beyond the confines of the town, into a world she had never known existed. The Apache warrior's eyes swept over the crowd, scanning faces, taking in the reality of what had just unfolded. Then he turned back to her, and in that look was a promise, safety, guidance, and the courage to face whatever lay ahead. But he also knew the road would be dangerous, that there were many who would challenge them, who would not accept a young woman choosing her own path over the dictates of her family. She could feel it too, the weight of uncertainty pressing down. But it was different now, different from the fear that had ruled her before. This fear was tempered with possibility. With the chance to forge her own destiny, the father said nothing more. But his presence lingered like a storm cloud, dark and threatening. The girl could feel his gaze burning into her back as she turned to walk with the warrior. The town seemed smaller, quieter, as if holding its breath for what would come next. She took a deep breath, the dry wind filling her lungs, and stepped forward, leaving the past behind, though not without the knowledge that it would follow her. Haunting and shaping her, the warrior's horse waited patiently, its dark coat glinting in the sunlight. He held the reins and nodded, a silent invitation to begin the journey. The girl climbed onto the horse beside him, heart pounding, senses alert, every nerve alive with anticipation. They would ride into the unknown, into open plains and untamed lands, where danger and freedom walked hand in hand. Every step would test her courage, every mile would challenge her trust, and every night under the endless sky would demand that she'd face the shadows. She had long buried, as the horse lifted into motion. The town receding behind them, she could feel the tension of the square. The eyes that had watched her, the father who had tried to control her, still pressing against her thoughts. The warrior guided the horse with quiet confidence, and she clung to the hope that his promise of protection was more than words. The journey had begun. But the story was far from over. Every mile carried risk. Every horizon held uncertainty. and the choices she would have to make were only just starting to take shape. The plains stretched ahead, endless and unforgiving. Sure. And she felt the first stirring of a life that might belong to her entirely. But danger lingered like a shadow on the horizon, waiting for the moment to strike. And the Apache warriors' calm promise would soon be tested by forces neither of them could yet imagine. The wind picked up, sending dust swirling around them like restless spirits, and the girl felt the weight of the unknown pressing against her shoulders. She had left the town behind, but the past was not so easily escaped. Every step, every moment, would carry echoes of what she had endured and what she might yet face. The plains stretched endlessly ahead, a vast, open canvas for freedom, but also a stage for trials she had no way of predicting. The Apache warrior's presence was steady, unshakable, and yet she knew that the journey would demand courage. She had only begun to discover. The first chapter of her new life had begun, and the tension of the past, the uncertainty of the future, and the promise of protection all mingled in the air around her. The plains held secrets, dangers, and possibilities, and every beat of her heart reminded her that nothing would ever be the same. The wind whispered through the grass, as if urging her forward. The horse's hooves drummed a steady rhythm, and the Apache warrior's eyes scanned the horizon. The journey had started, and the story of courage, trust, and survival was only just beginning, leaving the next chapter full of questions, dangers, and the promise of freedom yet to be claimed. The plains stretched endlessly ahead, a vast expanse of gold and green under a sky so wide it made the girl feel both small and strangely free. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant pine, and with every mile, the echoes of the town faded behind her. Yet the shadow of her father lingered, not in sight, but in memory, pressing on her thoughts like a weight she could not shake. She felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief that she was no longer under his harsh rule, and fear of the unknown that stretched ahead. As vast and untamed as the plains themselves, the Apache warrior rode beside her, his presence steady and unyielding. He did not speak much, but she found comfort in the quiet rhythm of his horse's hooves and the certainty in his movements. Every so often he would glance at her with eyes that seemed to measure not just her safety, but her courage, a kind of gaze that understood without words. She had never known someone could see her in such a way, someone who could perceive the fear, the longing, and the hidden strength all at once. She wanted to ask him questions, but the words felt fragile, as though they might shatter if spoken aloud. The first day passed slowly, the sun climbing high in the sky and then sinking low, painting the plains in shades of fire and shadow. They made camp near a small creek, the sound of running water soothing in the quiet evening. The girl helped gather wood and build a fire, her hands shaking at first but growing steadier with every task. The warrior watched her silently, nodding occasionally, never speaking more than necessary. And yet his silence was not cold, it was patient, allowing her to find her own rhythm, her own strength, as night fell. The wind carried distant noises' hooves on hard earth. The faint murmur of voices, and the girl's heart leapt into her throat. She could not help imagining her father's wrath, imagining men sent to retrieve her, imagining the town turning into a trap she could not escape. The warrior noticed her tension and reached out, a hand brushing hers lightly, grounding her in the present. "They will not follow us tonight," he said softly. "We are safe here." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the certainty in his voice, but the fear lingered, twisting like a shadow through her thoughts as they ate in silence. The warrior began to tell stories, not of battles or conquest, but of the land of the people, of the lessons he had learned moving through the plains. He spoke of survival, of reading the sky, of listening to the wind. The girl listened, captivated, and slowly her fear began to transform into curiosity. She realized that this journey was not just about escape, it was about learning, about discovering a part of life she had never known. And in the warmth of the firelight, she allowed herself, for the first time, to imagine that she could belong somewhere beyond the shadow of her father's control. The next morning brought a chill, the kind that cut through thin clothing and made the girl shiver despite the sun climbing overhead. They rode deeper into the plains, the ground dry and cracked in places, wildflowers breaking through in others. The warrior was careful, choosing paths that provided cover, that allowed them to move quietly. She noticed how he scanned the horizon constantly, how he read the land like an open book. She wanted to ask how he could see so much, how he could predict what might come. But the words never seemed enough as the sun reached its zenith. They stopped near a stand of trees that offered shade and a chance to rest. The girl dismounted, letting the horse graze while she stretched aching muscles. The warrior's attention never left the horizon, and she began to realize that their journey was not just about distance, but about vigilance, about preparing for threats that could appear without warning. She felt the tension of the open land pressing in, the sense that danger could be anywhere, a reminder that freedom in these plains was hard-won, fragile, and never guaranteed. Later, while collecting water from a narrow stream, the girl noticed movement in the distance. Shadows between the trees, too deliberate to be animals. Her heart raced, and she called softly to the warrior. In an instant, he was beside her, eyes narrowing as he assessed the threat. He did not panic, but the girl could feel the tension ripple through him. The awareness that even the vastness of the plains could conceal enemies. They crouched low, moving silently, and she realized that her training, however informal, was just beginning. The warrior's presence was both protective and demanding. He expected her to observe, to learn, to anticipate. By nightfall, the encounter had passed without confrontation, but the girl could not shake the fear. She had glimpsed how precarious freedom truly was. Every mile, every choice, carried risks she had never faced in the town. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to understand the warrior's world. But he remained silent, allowing her to feel the tension for herself, to learn what it meant to survive. And in that silence, she began to understand the depth of the conflict they faced, not just with her father or the world outside, but within herself as they camped again. The girl noticed something about the warrior that she had not seen before. Moments when his gaze softened. Moments when he seemed to drift into thought. Moments when the weight of the plains, the past, and the responsibilities he carried pressed visibly on him. She wondered what stories he held in his heart, what battles he had fought, and what losses he had endured. The land was his teacher, but his eyes spoke of a life that was not entirely his own. And in these quiet moments, she began to sense that their paths had intertwined not only by circumstance, but by a shared need to navigate fear, danger, and trust. The days blended into one another, each one bringing small victories and new tensions. They found shelter in hidden groves, hunted sparingly, and learned to read the signs of the land, the distant caw of a bird, the scuff of hooves on dry earth, the subtle bend of a tree branch that hinted at movement. The girl's fear began to transform into respect, and the warrior's calm authority became a guide she could rely on. But she also realized that the journey was far from safe. The plains held other eyes, other threatsmen who might not approve of a young woman defying her father. Men who lived by the same harsh codes of survival as he once had. One evening, while gathering firewood, she overheard the distant voices of men speaking in low tones. Her pulse quickened, and the warrior's attention sharpened instantly. They moved silently, crouching behind rocks and brush, listening. The voices were too far to discern names, but she could sense the menace in the words, the same threat she had felt lurking in the town. The warrior spoke softly, explaining how to read the voices, how to anticipate intent, how to measure danger without acting recklessly. She realized then that the conflict they faced was not just her father or the journey ahead, was the world itself, a constant test of awareness, skill, and courage. That night, under the pale light of a rising moon, the girl lay beside the fire, exhausted but alert. She thought of her father, of the harshness she had left behind, and of the warrior whose calm strength had become a lifeline. She understood that their journey was not just about fleeing, it was about surviving, learning, and growing in a world that offered no guarantees. The Apache warrior slept lightly, one hand on his weapon, eyes flicking to shadows, ever vigilant. She felt both comforted and unsettled by this, realizing that protection came at the price of constant awareness. And freedom was never without its trials. The next morning brought an uneasy stillness. The wind carried the scent of smoke from distant fires, and the girl sensed that the plains themselves were shifting. Warning of changes she could not yet understand, she watched the warrior scan the horizon, noting the lines of tension in his face. The way he adjusted the horse's pace, the subtle signs that danger was near. Every moment felt like a test, every step a challenge. She was learning that trust was fragile, that courage was not simply a matter of will, and that every choice mattered. By midday they reached a rocky ridge overlooking a wide valley. The sight was breathtaking rolling hills, streams glinting in sunlight, the distant shimmer of settlements, small and sparse. But beauty carried its own danger. The warrior's eyes swept the valley, noting tracks, signs of movement, and the positions of possible threats. He explained how the land could be both a sanctuary and a trap, and the girl realized that the conflict they faced was not always obvious. That danger could hide behind beauty, and that survival required both awareness and intuition. As they rode on, the girl's thoughts turned inward. She reflected on the life she had left, the fear that had shaped her, and the courage she was beginning to find. The conflict was not only with her father or the unknown men who might pursue them, was within herself. A struggle to shed fear, claim autonomy, and embrace the uncertain future. She understood that the journey would test not just her body, but her mind and heart, that every decision carried weight, and that every mile forward was both a victory and a challenge, even as the plains stretched endlessly. Offering both freedom and threat, she felt a growing connection to the warrior. Not friendship in a simple sense, but a bond forged in shared risk, in quiet understanding, and in the promise of protection. She realized that survival would require not only skill and courage, but trust of fragile. Precious trust that could make the difference between life and death. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the plains, and they made camp once more. The girl looked at the warrior, understanding that the journey ahead would test them both in ways neither could yet predict. Threats lingered in the distance, dangers hid in plain sight, and the lessons of the land were only beginning to unfold. The conflict was not over, the tension had only deepened, and every choice they made would shape what came next. And so, under the vast sky of the plains, with the distant howl of coyotes echoing in the night, the girl and the warrior prepared for the trials ahead. The journey continued, suspense thickening with every step, dangers waiting unseen, and the story of courage, trust, and survival stretching endlessly before them, unresolved and compelling. The plains had grown harsher with every mile, the sun cutting down like a relentless overseer, and the wind carrying whispers of danger that the girl could not yet fully understand. Days of travel had turned into weeks, and though she had grown stronger, more aware, the shadow of her past followed her as relentlessly as the sun followed the horizon. Her father's anger was a ghost that haunted every thought, every pause, every sound of the wind through the tall grasses. She knew he would not give up easily. And now, even as they moved farther from the town, other dangers seemed to close in around them, threats that neither she nor the warrior could ignore. That morning, the air was thick and still, an oppressive silence that pressed on her chest. The warrior had slowed the horse, scanning the horizon with careful precision. He had always been cautious, always alert, but today something felt different. His hand hovered near his weapon, fingers brushing the leather strap in a constant rhythm of readiness. She could feel the tension in him, a taut energy that made her stomach churn. Something was coming, though she could not yet see it. "Stay close," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the ridge ahead. "We're not alone." His voice carried calm authority, but beneath it lay the same sharp edge she had learned to recognize as warning. She shifted closer on the horse, gripping the reins tightly, heart pounding. She knew he was serious. Every instinct told her that danger was near, though the plains appeared empty and serene. The contrast made her uneasy, and the stillness itself seemed like a trap waiting to spring. They crested a small hill and looked down into a valley that stretched wide. dotted with clusters of scrub and rocks. Shadows moved in the distance, small fleeting figures that vanished when she tried to focus. Her breath caught. "Are those people?" she asked, a voice trembling. The warrior's eyes narrowed. "Possibly. We need to be ready for anything. Keep your senses sharp." He did not elaborate, and she knew better than to press. Every word he spoke carried the weight of experience. Every silence carried even more. They descended into the valley. Moving slowly, carefully, the horses' hooves silent on the soft earth. The girl could feel the tension building with every step, her pulse drumming in her ears, her hands slick with sweat. She had learned to read the land like he did, to notice subtle changes, the way the grass bent slightly in one direction, the faint break in a tree branch, the glint of metal in the sunlight. Each small detail made her more aware of the precariousness of their situation. The warrior did not speak unless necessary, letting her grow into her vigilance, teaching her without words. By midday, they had found a shallow ravine to rest in, the rocks offering some concealment. The girl dismounted, stretching muscles stiff from long hours on horseback. She gathered water from a small pool, her hands trembling. Not just from exertion, but from the constant tension that had begun to grip her mind. The warrior watched her quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon, muscles coiled, ready. She wanted to ask him about the people in the valley, about what might be coming, but she did not. Questions now seemed dangerous. She had learned that patience often mattered more than curiosity. Suddenly, the sharp sound of a branch snapping echoed from the edge of the ravine. Both froze. The girl's heart leaped. She could feel the warrior's attention sharpen instantly, his entire body moving like a spring ready to launch. Shadows shifted between the trees and the rocks. Figures emerged, masked by dust and distance. They were men, armed and moving with purpose, their eyes scanning the ravine like predators seeking prey. The girl realized in that moment that the journey had escalated beyond the ordinary challenges of the plains. This was not chance, it was pursuit, deliberate and relentless. The warrior dismounted, moving silently to position himself between the girl and the approaching threat. "Stay behind me," he ordered, voice low but firm. She obeyed, gripping the horse's reins as he crouched slightly, body taut, ready. The men paused at the edge of the ravine, their voices low and rough, speaking in a language she did not understand, yet she could sense the hostility, the intent, the danger radiating off them. She felt a chill creep down her spine. The protection she had begun to trust was now tested in the harshest way yet. One of the men stepped forward, and the warrior's hand moved almost imperceptibly to his weapon. There was no hesitation in him, no panic, only the measured precision of someone who had faced danger countless times. The girl could feel the tension stretching tight, a rope pulled to its limit, and every breath seemed louder than normal, every sound magnified. She had never felt anything like this. Fear had never been so intense, so immediate, so all-consuming. Then a voice called out from the distance, rough and commanding, "She's ours." The girl's stomach turned. The past had caught up with them, and now it was amplified by unknown accomplices. She could see the warrior's eyes flash briefly, sharp and fierce, and she knew that whatever came next, he would not let her fall. But she also knew that the threat was real, and that their survival depended on split-second decisions and courage she was only beginning to find within herself. The men advanced cautiously, circling the ravine, trying to cut off escape routes. The girl's hands were clammy, her pulse racing. The warrior whispered instructions, guiding her movements, teaching her to anticipate, to notice, to act. Every instinct screamed that the situation could explode at any second, that one wrong move would spell disaster. Yet beneath the fear, a small spark of determination lit inside her. She could not allow herself to be taken, not now, not after everything she had endured. Not when the promise of freedom was so close. Ours seemed to stretch endlessly, the tension thickening with every passing moment. The men never fully revealed themselves, never committed, but their presence was constant, like a shadow looming over the ravine. The girl noticed the smallest signs, the faint crack of a twig, the glint of sunlight on metal, the movement of dust across rocks. Each signal was a potential threat, and she could feel herself growing sharper, faster, more aware. Fear was still there, but it had begun to change into something else. Alertness, readiness, the will to survive. Night fell, bringing with it a darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. The ravine became a cage of shadows, and the girl felt the weight of isolation for the first time since leaving the town. The warrior moved around her, a constant presence, checking the perimeter, whispering instructions, and keeping her calm while preparing for what might come. She had learned to trust him, yet the uncertainty gnawed at her. They were outnumbered, out in the open, with threats she could not fully measure. Every noise in the night felt magnified, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a branch, the distant howl of a coyote. Each sound might herald danger, or might be nothing at all, but she could not ignore any of it. As they crouched near the fire, she dared to ask, voice barely above a whisper, "Why are they after me?" The warrior did not answer immediately, scanning the shadows. Finally, he said, "Some people cannot accept choice. Some believe control is their right. We've crossed paths with them now, and they will not let go easily." His words were calm, but she could feel the tension in his muscles, the readiness that had become second nature to him. She realized that the journey was no longer just about escape, it was about survival, about outmaneuvering those who would take away the life she was beginning to claim for herself. The wind shifted, carrying a distant sound that made both of them tense. Whose voices? Or merely the trick of the plains at night? They listened, waiting, hearts pounding, every sense alert. The girl felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration, the kind of intensity that made every second feel like an hour. Every heartbeat a drum counting down to an unknown moment. The warrior's eyes met hers, and she could see both reassurance and warning in them. They were on the brink. The next moments would define everything that came after. And she understood that her courage, his skill, and the choices they made would decide if they survived. Hours passed in a tense silence, the shadows deepening, the unknown pressing closer. The girl could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, sharpening her awareness, heightening every sound, every movement, every flicker of light. The men had not yet committed, but the sense of inevitability hung in the air. She knew the climax of this chase, the turning point, was near. Every instinct screamed that the storm was about to break. The plains had been a place of freedom, but they were also a stage for conflict, for confrontation, for a test of courage and trust like she had never faced before. She shivered, not from the cold, but from anticipation, from the raw tension that pressed on her chest. The warrior's presence was steady, anchoring her, yet she could feel that the danger was immediate, unavoidable, and approaching fast. Every shadow could hide a threat, every sound could signal attack, and she realized that when it came, there would be no time to hesitate. No time for fear, only action, instinct, and trust in the man who had become her protector. The fire flickered. Shadows danced across their faces, and the wind carried whispers of an approaching storm. The girl's heart beat rapidly, every sense alive, every muscle coiled. The moment they had been moving toward, the inevitable confrontation, was only minutes away. The plains, so vast and open, now felt like a crucible, testing their courage, their skill, and their will to survive. And as the darkness deepened and the distant shapes of the enemy drew closer, the girl realized that nothing could prepare her for what was coming next. The wind howled through the valley, carrying dust and the faint smell of smoke, as if the plains themselves were holding their breath. The girl's heart raced, every nerve taut, as the figures of the men who had been following them emerged from the shadows. The Apache warrior's horse pawed the ground, muscles coiled, ready to strike. The girl felt a mixture of fear and resolve. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the confrontation. That would decide if she could finally step into a life of her own or be dragged back into the past she had fought so hard to leave behind. The men advanced cautiously, trying to cut off escape, their voices low and harsh, filled with threats and promises of violence. The warrior did not move to attack immediately. Instead, he positioned himself between the girl and the intruders, body tense and eyes scanning for the smallest sign of movement. He whispered to her, "Stay calm. Watch. Listen. Act only when I give the signal." She swallowed, gripping the reins tightly, realizing that courage was no longer about running, it was about presence, awareness, and trust. Suddenly, a shout rang out, and one of the men lunged forward. The warrior reacted instantly, a blur of motion as he blocked and redirected. His experience and skill evident in every precise movement. The girl felt her heart hammering, adrenaline surging through her veins. She realized how real the danger was, how close they had come to losing everything. The warrior moved with an unshakable certainty, but he never let go of the instinct to protect. Every strike, every maneuver was calculated to neutralize the threat, not merely destroy it. She noticed the men faltering, their confidence wavering against the calm intensity of the warrior. One by one, the intruders hesitated, unsure, their plans unraveling under his mastery of both strategy and the terrain. The girl felt a spark of hope flicker inside her. Perhaps they could survive this. Perhaps the freedom she had glimpsed in the open plains could finally become a reality. She had endured fear, pain, and oppression. But now she felt a small surge of empowerment, the realization that she was not entirely powerless, that her choices, her vigilance, and her trust mattered. The battle was swift but tense, a dance of shadows and dust, of hooves and shouted commands. The girl watched, wide-eyed, as the warrior disarmed the men, forcing them to retreat one by one. Each moment stretched like an eternity, every heartbeat echoing the stakes. Finally, the last of the pursuers faltered, realizing the futility of their attack, and the valley fell silent once more. The plains themselves seemed to exhale, tension dissipating like morning mist under the sun. The girl's knees buckled slightly as the adrenaline faded, and the warrior steadied her, his hands firm on her shoulders. "It's over for now," he said softly. "They will not follow us again. The threat is gone." Relief washed over her, mingled with the lingering rush of fear that still tingled in her veins. She realized that this confrontation, terrifying as it had been, had marked a turning point. She was no longer entirely defined by fear, by the menacing shadow of her father, or by the threat of others. She had taken a step toward autonomy, toward the chance to shape her own life. They made camp that night near a stream, firelight casting a warm glow across their tired faces. The warrior tended to the horses while she unpacked some supplies. For the first time since leaving her town, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, to feel the quiet of the plains without the constant edge of terror. The world was still harsh and untamed, but it was theirs to navigate together. The girl realized that freedom was not simply the absence of threat, it was the ability to act, to choose, to trust, and to grow. As they sat by the fire, the warrior spoke quietly about the land, about life on the plains, about the lessons he had learned over years of travel and survival. She listened intently, realizing that the journey was about more than escape. It was about learning, understanding, and connecting with a world larger than the town she had left behind. Every story he told was filled with wisdom, not just about survival, but about honor, courage, and resilience. She felt herself absorbing it all, feeling stronger with each passing word. The next days passed in a rhythm that was both exhausting and grounding. They moved with care, navigating the plains, finding food and shelter, observing the world around them with sharp attention. The girl's skills grew, her confidence deepened, and the bond between her and the warrior strengthened. She began to understand him not just as a protector, but as a teacher, a guide through both the physical and emotional landscapes of her new life. He trusted her to notice details, to anticipate, and to act with judgment, and she rose to the challenge, discovering strength she had never known she possessed as they traveled. The girl reflected on the path that had brought her here. The memory of her father's harsh hand still lingered, a reminder of the life she had escaped, but it no longer held the same power over her. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and she had survived. And she realized that survival was not enough anymore. She wanted more, the chance to live fully, to make choices, to embrace the wide-open world with all its challenges and possibilities. The plains had tested her, shaped her, and prepared her for the life she was beginning to claim. One evening, as they rested on a bluff overlooking a valley painted gold by the setting sun, the girl turned to the warrior. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything. For not letting me go back. For showing me a way forward." He nodded, eyes reflecting both the fading light and a quiet pride. "You did this," he said. "Every step, every choice was yours. I only helped you see it." She felt a swell of gratitude, but also a growing understanding that trust, courage, and resilience were now parts of her, inseparable from who she was becoming. In the days that followed, the girl's confidence continued to grow. She learned to read the wind, to anticipate threats, to recognize signs in the land that had once been invisible to her. She and the warrior moved in harmony, an unspoken rhythm born of shared experience, mutual respect, and necessity. They had survived threats, navigated uncertainty, and faced the harsh realities of the plains, and yet each step forward brought new challenges. The tension of survival remained, but it was tempered by the certainty that they could face it together eventually. The plains opened into a wide valley where the land was gentler, where the streams were abundant, and where the horizon promised the possibility of a future not dictated by fear. The girl looked out across the valley, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the wind on her face, and she realized that she had survived more than just the pursuit of others. She had survived her own doubts, her own fears, and the legacy of a past that had tried to define her. The warrior stood beside her, watching the horizon as he always did, and she understood that freedom was not just a place, but a state of being earned through courage, trust, and perseverance. Her father and the men who had followed her were gone, defeated not just by skill, but by the determination of someone who refused to be controlled. The girl felt a sense of closure, not as vengeance, but as release from fear, from oppression, from the shadows of her past. She had taken ownership of her life, and the plains, with all their danger and beauty, had become the canvas on which she could paint her own story as the sun set behind the distant hills, casting long shadows and golden light across the valley. The girl and the warrior prepared to settle for the night. The fire crackled softly, the horses grazed quietly, and the vast sky stretched above them, endless and free. She realized that this journey had changed her completely. She was no longer the girl cowering under the weight of her father's hand. She was someone who had faced fear, embraced uncertainty, and discovered strength, courage, and the power of trust. The Apache warrior's eyes met hers, and in that moment she saw not just protection, but partnership, respect, and the quiet understanding of someone who had walked alongside her through danger and come through it together. She knew that life would still hold challenges, still demand vigilance, and still test the courage she had found. But she also knew that she had the ability to face them, to make her own choices, and to claim the freedom she had fought so hard to reach. The plains were vast. The journey had been perilous, and the shadow of the past had been heavy, but for the first time, the girl felt the exhilaration of being truly alive. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying both the scent of sage and the promise of possibility. She understood that this was more than escape. It was the beginning of a life shaped by her own courage, guided by trust, and illuminated by hope. The lessons of the journey, the bond with the warrior, and the trials they had faced together would remain with her forever. As night fell and stars appeared one by one, the girl leaned back, feeling the earth beneath her, the wind on her face, and the steady presence of the warrior beside her. The story of fear, danger, and pursuit had ended, but the story of her life of freedom, courage, and the endless possibilities of the plains was just beginning. She had survived, she had grown, and she had claimed her right to choose her own path. And in that quiet, vast night, with the fire flickering softly and the horses resting, she finally understood what it meant to be free, to be strong, and to face the future with unwavering resolve. The plains stretched endlessly, a testament to the trials she had overcome and the new life she had earned. The Apache warrior had kept his promise. but more importantly, she had kept her own to face fear, to trust, and to live on her own terms. And as the stars shone over the valley, the girl realized that the journey, with all its danger, tension, and uncertainty, had brought her not just to safety, but to herself. The story ended not with fear, but with hope, courage, and the promise of a life finally lived on her own terms.